Elfie, welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, so happy to have you here today. I'm just going to dive right into the first question. Can you tell me about your art background? How did you come to become an artist?
I'm definitely not a traditionally trained artist. I'm self-taught. I went to high school and enjoyed art, but I was also very academically successful and in other ways. And so coming from a very uh, somewhat traditional family, and being very academically successful, there was this sort of understanding that I would probably move into something very professional. So I moved into and got accepted to the architecture school at the University of Waterloo. So I did my training there. So as an artist, I'm not necessarily traditionally trained, but I am trained in like creative fields. That education there was excellent as far as understanding my creative thinking and all that sort of stuff. It was a great education that way. And I got my master's there, but I didn't feel very much like I fit into the mold that needed to be an architect. It just felt like I was always kind of sacrificing something. So, being that as it was, I still wasn't even ready to be an artist, but I ended up moving into becoming a teacher. So, I went and studied, I got a Bachelor of Education and met artist friends in that way. And from there, one of my best friends, Nazra Bar, she's still a practicing artist in Toronto. Her and I she had opened a school in the East End of Toronto, which was like an art studio school. And she opened it with one of her friends, and I kind of jumped on their second year. And even then, I still didn't feel like I was an artist, even though have been an artist my whole life, as I understand. But it wasn't until I kind of went through and I'll get more into the nitty gritty of it because there's another question that sort of steers me into that. But I just had some really unfortunate things happen in my life that brought me to my art. And I've always used art as a conduit for healing, and it's like my safe space in a lot of ways. And it really wasn't until some major things happened that I decided to publicly proclaim in for lack of a better word that I was an artist and sort of went into it that way and understood that. It was definitely a lifelong process. Lots of imposter syndrome up until now. So I wouldn't say I really understood that with myself probably till, the last 10 years, I would say.
So, my next question is what art modalities do you focus on and why do you work with these modalities?
Well, I think I've always since I was young, been drawn to drawing and poetry and collage. Like those are sort of my go-tos. Poetry for sure. I remember one of the first poems I ever wrote was when my grandfather died. I was 11 years old, and I wish I still had a copy of it, but I threw it into his grave at the funeral because I really would be curious to read that. And I've been writing poetry since then. I've always written poetry and writing in general, just ways to sort of unjog internal feelings, and painting and drawing. I do that a lot. I do a lot of journaling. So, and do kind of a creative, intuitive journaling with collage and mixed media. So I don't sit with one media. I definitely work with a lot. More recently, I say in the last 10 years, I've really moved into street art. I do a lot of street art in and around Canada, Kitchener specifically, but no matter where I go, like we just came back from a trip to Europe as a family, and I brought stuff with me and we pasted there. I had gotten into street art and understanding it in my thesis at Waterloo. I was looking at how street art can work with urban design and how it can foster an understanding. And then again, when some shit hit the fan, I was like, fuck it, let's do it. So I started using the city as my canvas, and I really I think it's such a raw form. It's one of my most I would say cathartic pieces of or sorry media that I use. I work a lot different medias though. I don't like to stick to one. I think I'm just very curious and I'm always like wanting to learn new things and happy to make those mistakes, and I like the process of art more than actually the final product. So I'm very curious artist that way. I will get bored, but the journaling and the poetry and the sort of mixed media intuitive creative practice where I just sit and write how I feel. That's been sort of consistent. I've had that forever since I was in high school. But the street art's new. I do some film, like I'm a community producer for a local show on Rogers that I used to give a lot of films to. I haven't had time to really contribute for a while, but I really, I'm a very curious artist. I don't say that I prefer one media, but I would say, yeah, mixed media is definitely would be my go-to, perhaps.
And when you say street art, what do you mean by that? Like, do you mean
So
like spray
street
painting, or
art,
what do you mean?
say that again,
Do
sorry.
you mean spray painting? Like when you say street art?
Well, I'd give you a whole lecture on what I think street art is.
Go ahead and tell me.
So street art, and it's so funny, I actually just had an interaction with a man in London, England, because we went to London. We went to Crete. My family's from Crete and Cyprus in the Mediterranean, and we had a stopover in London. We stayed a few days there, and I did some street art there. And street art for me is a little different than just spray painting. Street art is this idea of imposing your work on public spaces in hopes to catch someone's eye, make a statement. Some people would argue tagging with spray paint is not street art, but I would disagree. I think it's using the surface of urban spaces as a canvas in hopes to practice your work and showcase your talents. And I also love that it's not permanent and you don't own it, right? So it's this idea of you're not connected to a gallery, you're not connected to anything. It's just you in the public sphere. And that's not to say that galleries and other vehicles are not what I obviously am giving work to a gallery now, but that media itself is, I just find it really kind of intoxicating. Like you're putting it out there. You don't know who's going to see it. You don't know if it's going to stay up. And I had a really a really funny interaction with a street artist in London. We were in this area where there was a lot of street art, and I wanted to, showcase that there were some of my favorites there, like Banksy, Shepherd Fairey, and they had done stuff there. And I was like, oh yeah, let's go see. And it was great. I don't particularly like those places because it's basically like a tourist attraction. You go to see street art, which is great, but it's also important for art to kind of spontaneously exist places that you wouldn't see it. And so there was this man there trying to mansplain to me what street art was, and I just thought that was funny. I'm like, that's like, he thought he like owned the property that he spray painted on. He was saying stuff like, you can't, I don't let people tag my work. And I was like, well, you don't really understand that it's not yours. You don't even own this. Like, you know what I mean? So that's what I like about it. I like that. Will it stay up? Will it not? And you go to more pacified places in the city, like downtown cores, that are often run by BIAs and policed by bylaw, and it's harder to keep things up in those places. So it's a little game, right? And there's something kind of precarious about it that I really like. So yeah, I would say anything that you can see. I don't particularly spray paint. I like to wheat paste. I make my stuff very organically. I don't use glue. I make it out of flour, and I wheat paste posters. And I used to do bigger ones, but I've gotten really excited about just making very easily printed ones. I have a pretty decent printer downstairs. So black and white, anything on 8.5 by 11 that I can scour together. And there's a few colored ones that I have that are easy to print because those can be costly, and sometimes they don't stay up. So,
Yes.
so I use a lot of wheat paste. So for those people who don't know what that is, it's creating a glue with flour, and there's different formulas that you can use to keep it stickier. You can make it last longer because it will go bad. I use it intentionally, like I'll make a little potion. I'll set an intention when I make it, and then off I go into the night.
Are you able to share your formula that you use?
I would say it's about 1 part water, 1 part flour, and I add a lot of sugar because sugar keeps it sticky. It helps to create more of an adhesive part. If you're doing it in the winter, I tend to do it in the summer, and I like the idea of it being like a cyclical thing where I do it in the summer. But if you're doing it in the winter, you can add salt. That decreases its freezing point so that you can apply it to a surface and it doesn't, because it'll freeze right away in certain temperatures. And then you can also add vinegar. to it to keep it from spoiling. If it spoils, it still works. It just smells really bad. Like I've had wheat paste in my trunk that shouldn't have been in my trunk for a while. And if I'm out somewhere and I'm like, oh, it's a great spot, and I have something in the back of my car, I was like it doesn't smell great, but kind of smells like glue in a really potent way. And to sort of stop that from happening, you can put it vinegar, but yeah, I'd say like 1 to 1 for flour and water. The key is you want to heat it up for a little bit. You can heat it up in the microwave. You can put it on a stovetop, and you just let it boil over just a little bit till it thickens, and then it's got the correct consistency there. And there's lots of formulas online, and I would encourage you to just practice. You can put glue in it as well. I put crystals in my boxes of wheat paste to enchant them. So feel free to do that.
Question for you. What was your master's thesis on?
I had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do, but I was very interested in the idea of democratizing space. Okay. So understanding that public space is for everybody. And so I looked at Yonge Street specifically in Toronto because I was so fascinated with everything that it had. It had a mission for the street involved population. It had all these strip clubs that I just thought were so fascinating, alongside like the mall, Dundas Square. Like there was just such a variety that I thought it was undeniably like this palimpsest of what a city has in it. And so I looked at the street through the lens of 5 different buildings, one being Zanzibar, a strip club, the Yonge Street Mission, Dundas Square, the subway, and Sam the Record Man. And I sort of and it could have been any other 5. Those were the 5 that I thought were interesting. And I sort of mapped the street out to see how would this building look at that street. And so seeing the crevices that Zanzibar, for example, would look at, or the Yonge Street Mission, and then thinking about how I would create something, because the idea of a thesis in architecture is that you ideally want to build a space. But after doing that research and observing the space, I just realized that there's no way I could create a building that would satisfy all these people without having people misunderstand it. And I thought the easiest and the best way to create change in the way that I wanted to create change was not through buildings, but through street art. I designed, I think, 10 different street art projects that would have theoretically been intervened onto the street in hopes of changing the consciousness of the population. And I think that should have been an indication for me that I was to become a street artist. It hadn't clicked in quite yet, but this idea that in order to create buildings, we really need to understand who uses them. And oftentimes with big developers or larger scale business minded developments, a lot of these places get swept under the rug. So this idea of showcasing the democracy in a street art kind of way was exciting for me.
You had mentioned that the street art itself is something that can be permanent, or more permanent if it's spray painted, or it can be something that's more temporary. What is it actually democratizing? Voice, expression, marginalization, privilege, modality, materiality, ideology, belief system. The reason I ask is because when we talk about the agora and we talk about democracy and democratization, and the agora is the space within ancient Greece where people could meet and speak truth to power, which at the end of the day was male landowners at the time, so ancient Greece. But the agora is the sort of iconographic reference point when we talk about what is to democratize space, right? It's a place where there's voice, capacitation, right? A place where people are capacitated, or they're enabled to be able to speak their voice, or they are enabled to say what's on their mind. The agora is the marketplace. It's a place where you can express how you feel about something to the public. And accept some sort of audience. Now, that may be an audience that's receptive to what you're saying, or it may not be. But the whole point is democratization and the democratization of space is about giving voice to people and allowing them to be able to speak freely about their views, so that the reason being is that with this mix of different voices, from that can emerge a social and political system that is reminiscent or representative of all the people within it. And I'm just wondering for you, when you talk about street art as a method or a way of democratizing space, is it about reclaiming power? Is it about taking up space? Is it about having voice? Is it about expressing art that wouldn't be expressed elsewhere? Is it about plastering art on art architecture that would not typically allow such things because it violates societal expectations? Or what is it for you? Like, what is it about street art that allows for this idea of democratization?
I think it's all of that. For me specifically, I think this will get more, well, I mean, I'll answer the question that perhaps you pose later, but when I started doing street art, it was during a time of my life where I was being like gagged and stifled, and I wasn't allowed to speak. I think in the context of my thesis, it's to open community eyes to possibly what gets overlooked when creating new developments in the downtown core. Because a lot of the times these developers will come in and sort of homogenize public space in hopes of whatever they hope to do, which is there's nuance there, obviously. Oh, but with regards to my thesis, there was this sort of argument that, strip clubs, missions, these sort of places have just as much of a space in our cities as strip malls and subway systems, right? And so we need to not homogenize them, but observe them and understand them as this palimpsest that gets created in city cores. In my specific experience, I started doing street art because when I started to really understand that I was an artist. So back in, I don't know, 2018 or so, 2019, I was working at a school board locally, and I thought I had a decent job. I was in a tech department with mostly men in the tech department. And I had been working with men for most of my career. And I even argue that before all this happened, I don't think that I was as much of a, I guess, feminist, if you want to use that word, but like, I wasn't not necessarily a girl's girl, but I knew how to play the game. I was pretty successful in architecture. I left it because I didn't want to be there. I was working for higher firms. And like a lot of these more professional industries, they're often very male-centered. And so I knew how to play the game. And I knew certain things that, you have to kind of be okay with and all that stuff. And I guess a part of me thought I was okay with certain stuff. I was always very flirtatious and kind of, you knew how to befriend the guys that you were working with. And the school that I was working at had a lot of problems. And as I worked there for about a year, I developed some understandings of what was happening, and it eventually led to me getting harassed to a point where I was very uncomfortable and assaulted, not sexually, but like I got injured during the process, and it was likely a mistake, but like it was just really sad a really traumatic experience. But it was on account of what was happening in this school, where there was a very misogynistic, inequitable situation happening with the staff there. And I had a mental breakdown basically after that happened. And then that happened just before the summer started. In the summer of that, I think it was 2019, I had a breakdown. I was like traumatized by all of it. I couldn't believe it. I was like really shocked. And I came back to the school, and I wasn't able to work. I was working in the same office as these two men that had forced me into understanding what it was like in this school. And I came forward with allegations, and I was dismissed and put on stress leave. I was told not to talk to anybody from the school, not to talk to anybody who worked at the school board ever, which included my sister because she worked at the school board. I wasn't allowed to go to work. I wasn't allowed to check my email. I was very like, I always said, like they put me on house arrest with a gag order. Even before then, I remember like making comments and thinking like things about women in the workplace that I now would never ever say because I understand what happens to people when things happen and how quiet you have to be in order to get by sometimes. And so I was just like by doctor's orders, I have PTSD as a result of it, but like it was such a traumatic experience. I remember like just yelling at the HR departments and like having these, I was the crazy woman, right? And they wouldn't listen to me. And so I took to the streets. That's how I began doing street art, was because I was so frustrated. I felt quieted. I felt like nobody was listening to me and I had to say something. And so I made these drawings that kind of connected to what I was experiencing and I was putting them up all around the city. I remember that. I also wrote a comic book about the whole experience. And so that's what basically made me realize that I was an artist because my voice cannot be silenced. I've realized that. I have a hard time, especially when it comes to injustices, and that could be because of my neurodivergence, but I have a hard time not speaking up when bad things happen. But it wasn't until that happened to me that I realized that I could use my voice. And so I remember I was supposed to go back to work, and of course, being the victim in this situation, they were going to move me to a new school because I was the problem. And the persons, and it wasn't just those two people that I quote unquote came forward. It was the whole male staff was the problem. And that's probably why it exploded the way that it did because it was a bigger problem that I was identifying.
Yes.
And I don't wish any of them badly either, but it was like if the problem was so big, then let's just take her out and put her in a new school. And I was like, I'm not ready to go back to a school yet. And I was trying to get LTD to just move on with my life somehow. I wasn't ready to go back to work. And when that claim was denied, and I knew that I was going to have to continue to fight for my right to be traumatized by the trauma that they didn't think happened, I decided to quit. So on November 8th, I call it November 8th, 2020 was my rebirth day because it was the day I decided to not not work for a system. And up until then, it was like I needed to have a steady job. I needed to do this and that. And I felt like that's what I needed to do to be a part of society. And that was kind of the day that I decided, nope, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I call that my rebirth day. And I celebrate it every year. And then I published the book with the help of crowdfunding. So yeah, it was amazing. So that book, Butterfly, is the story of what happened. And it's a comic book. And that was kind of like I had published an oracle deck before that. But yeah, the street art was kind of the instigator, though. That's what kind of led me to do street art was enough pressure to quiet me down. Like there was the point in that story where I was posting poems about what was happening in an artful way, and I remember one of my union representatives threatening me my job because I had posted those poems onto my social media. I'm not glad that it happened, but I think it needed to happen. I always kind of said that it pushed me to realize that I could use my voice creatively and that I was valid as an artist. I had things to say. So, and now I have a lot more things to say because of what happened. So, the idea of advocating for the silenced is just something that I've now inherently will always do because of that. So,
We were
that's how street art happened. So for me, it kind of came from a place of being stifled and like forced into silence. And that was the only outlet I had.
We refer to this giving a voice as democratizing, but to what extent is it feminizing? I mean,
I don't know that
if
it's
we
necessarily feminizing. It's more, I would say, giving a voice to the marginalized. Because yeah, like females are obviously have been marginalized consistently since the ancient Greeks, since many cultures, right? There are lots of patriarchy is not a new thing. Um, but that also stifles lots of marginalized voices. It's not just the feminine voice. I think it stifles the non-patriarchal voice. Feminine being maybe a larger population, but I think it's beyond that. I think it's more than just that.
is there anything else that you would say are major themes or ideas that inspire your work?
Oh yeah, I think that understanding the ethereal and the sort of liminal parts of our reality are one of the core things that I find interesting. I'm uh I'm very interested in, the non-physical dimension and having communication with that and thinking that art is a tool in order to communicate with that. So that's been part of my work for a very long time. I I have had I've had a journey myself in pulling myself out of traditional religious practices, although I still use the imagery and connect with it in my own personal way. But I do feel like art is one of the ways in which we can commune with both our internal selves and our internal like subtle body, along with the sort of collective unconscious. So I love that aspect of it. I find that part very fascinating because being a conduit for that just presents so many like curious things that you can see happening in your work that you don't even realize you're doing. So I think that part of it excites me a lot. That's definitely a core of it. I'm a very spiritual person. I'm really interested in, metaphysics and paranormal things, and I think that's definitely one of the main things that inspires it. Like I'm inspired by a lot of artists that are like that, like early 1900s, like occultists. I'm really interested in what they did, and even people moving into like current times. I'm always curious about the supernatural that way. So I would say that's one other thing that definitely inspires my work, and looking at mental health, because I do think mental health is something that I want to learn more about. I've had lots of diagnoses that I agree or disagree with, but they're diagnoses for lack of a better word. And I actually do think those two kind of come together a little bit and ride that wave pretty in parallel. So those things for sure are part of my work. They inspire it a lot and are rooted in it for sure.
Do you have any art role models? And if so, who are those people?
Any sort of occultist, late 1800s, early 1900s, like Hilma Klint, Pamela Coleman Smith, even Aleister Crowley, even though he was a little bit crazy. Um, Kandinsky, like anyone who was using art as a means of connecting to the spiritual have always been something I could eat up and learn a lot about. And I loved their method of play, Dali, the Dadaists, just this idea of creating things as puzzles, and using yourself as the conduit for play have always been uh, I've always found them inspirational. And with poets, I really liked E. E. Cummings a lot growing up. I read a lot of his stuff. He was fun because he used to just deconstruct stuff and sort of push things out of the norm in an interesting way. And more recent artists, like David Lynch. I love David Lynch. Or loved him since he passed away. I love Lana Del Rey. I love her so much. I love the way she works. I love her music. Yeah, just anybody who's very kind of nostalgic, ethereal, interested in the supernatural. Those are things that I really gravitate towards.
Do you have a copy of your oracle deck with you?
So I have two decks. This is the first one that I published. It's called the White Owl Mystic Arcana. But this was like before all the stuff with the school board happened. This was like my first publication. I was really proud of this. It's kind of like a legacy piece. It's got like a mixture of um, like uh, what do you call it, astrological pieces, but it was a means of me understanding these things. Like, I would spend time during the April moon and I would look at, the flora, the fauna, the geometries connected to it. Same with the planets. So it's very astrological based, but also, cycles of the year. There's like solstice in here and eclipses and things like that. But this was kind of, I would say, like a study deck. I wanted an altar deck to work with. I wanted images that I could put on my altar to work with different times of the year. And then I think I was like about halfway through all these and I thought, well, this could be a deck. And then it developed into a deck.
Wow.
And so once I made one deck, it became evidently clear that it wasn't really hard to do that. You could do it. And so this next deck is Mystery Dawn. This one initially started with the images that I was creating when I started street arting. And when I started doing my street art, I would draw these little sigils in hopes of getting my message out. And then I refined it and kind of created more of a universal deck of images. And so these are different cards that I post around the city. And then I'll tag my name next to it. And then at the top of my Instagram page, you can like look up the what do you call it? The fortune.
Yeah.
So it's a deck of 33 cards, but this deck specifically was the one that started all of it. This image very much connects to one of the things that was said to me during my HR debacle. So some of them are very much connected to that experience, but they've evolved since then. Yeah, those are the two decks. So the Mystery Dawn and the White Owl Mystic Arcana.
That's amazing. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So getting into the vulva space, the question I have for you is what motivates you to create art representations of the vulva space?
I like that question because I get some flack from some people about it that I grew up with. Especially during my youth, I was a camp counselor at a Christian camp, and I have some friends that still connect with me from that. And they're always like, well, why a vulva? And I'm like, well, why not a vulva is the better question. Why not a vulva? Like, you don't ask anybody else, well, why did you paint a portrait? Or why did you paint a portrait of a building? It's like, well, why are you questioning it? Why is that subject matter requiring questioning? The vulva art that I'm giving to the gallery for this exhibition is a collection of pieces that I made, I think during the summer of like 2023 or something. I was learning how to lino cut print because I was curious about learning that printmaking modality. And I thought using the vulva was just a nice starting point. And I've always observed my artwork as portals. And the idea of using the vulva as a portal, which I think it is, it's a magic portal into new dimensions. So I just thought that would be an easy introduction to lino printing, but also something I could replicate many times and do different things with. And that's why I moved into it. And what's beautiful about it is as I played with it, it became very like cathartic in this sort of expression of my own sexuality as a mother who was revisiting her sexuality in that way. And I created a big series of images that I call magic portals. After I finished the piece, I drip some paint and let it kind of like penetrate down each time, and each one is a ritual. And it is a magic portal, and the idea is that they have magical qualities to them, much like the vulva. So to answer your question, why the vulva, I would say number one, why not? And then number two, because it is if I'm looking to create magic portals in my work, it is like the original.
Another question for you. Were there any social or political, local or global, that affected the evolution of your art making? If so, what were those things, those events, and how did they affect you?
Well, the local event and the sort of personal event was very much just what I've expressed to you about how street art became my space to express. I would say because of the fact that my work is very much me digesting what's going on in my life. It's always rooted in everything, right? So, I wrote a book during the pandemic called Poems I Wrote on My Smith Corona in 2020. And that was also when all this stuff was happening with the school board, but also when so much was happening in the world. And it just became a place like I bought a Smith Corona typewriter, and I would just every time I would get pissed off about something, I'd just type it out and I wouldn't edit them, and I published it like that.
Okay.
So it was like they're pretty crass. They're kind of like very raw. Um, and they have a multitude of influences. It's influenced by, the pandemic, political things that were happening that I was seeing. Um, I think it's always influencing my work because I think we're all political, but I think that I try to be conscious of what's happening. I obviously have blind spots like everybody, and I'm not afraid to let it simmer inside me. I am pretty sensitive that way. So all of my work, I would say, is a reflection of that. And more of it becomes more potent depending on what's going on. So that book that I wrote was that one's got a lot of it got a lot of swear words in it. It's got a lot of like pretty crass material. There'll be things that happen and then I'll feel like, making something and putting it up somewhere. So I think that because of the way that I work and the way that I sort of use my art as a means of reacting to things, whether they're personal things or political things, it's sort of like curated voice to that. It's always kind of doing that.
At the time, so 2018 was the Me Too, sort of the emergence of Me Too. 2020, the pandemic. Trump was elected in 2016 and then reelected in 2024. Does any of that affect how you approach your art?
Yes, very much so. I think for me, the catalyst was my, I would say I think my son was born in 2016, and that in itself was sort of cataclysmic for me creatively. And the first couple years with him were just, motherhood, introduction, that kind of thing. And I was always affected by everything that was going on, but I would say that I was more in survival mode during that time. But as he got older, definitely a few of the things that I've posted, I mean, since Trump got elected, since everything that has been kind of coming to light, are mostly political messages. Like I have this piece of work that I call my alphabet, and it's just a bunch of letters and sigils that I create that it's like a magic alphabet. And I post these words all over the world at this point. So, for example, in London, I did a big one that said decolonize. I like to write, one of my favorite ones is Hex the Patriarchy. I definitely think that if I'm going to be making larger political pieces, I prefer that they have a more global message. And I'm definitely interested in advocating for a non-patriarchal organization of the world. A lot of my street art will come to that, and even my book Butterfly, I would say, is very feminine, like oriented in the sense of giving voice to those who are silenced. So it's rooted, there's a lot of it sort of trickled into my work. I can't separate that from what I do, and I'm often finding myself creating pieces that are a little bit political or are a little bit, have more of a social consciousness. I can't not do it, especially given a lot of the things that are happening in the world right now. I think we have to use our voices as artists because this is when it's like a call to action.
What are art buyers' responses to your art?
There are people who like the work, but they're not interested in holding it, especially my vulva pieces. Those are kind of harder to digest for some people. I do find that the more, I don't know how to say this, like the more PG works sell better. So this deck, for example, the Woma deck, I don't work with any publishers. I like to keep my stuff kind of on my own. And this deck has sold like all over the world, like in like 30, 40 countries. But this is one of my first pieces, and it's one of my more prettier pieces, whereas I have a zine that I wrote called the Gaslight series, which is a set of really mean poems that had to be taken down because I was going to lose my job, even though I didn't take them down. That doesn't sell. That's the thing with this stuff. Like, and I think that's where I stand as far as making my art. Like, I will always make my art the way that I make my art, whether it makes money or not. And I will always put it out there, even if it has to come out of pocket. I find a way to do it. But as far as buyers, I do find that, the more polished something is, or not necessarily like what this one sells okay because it's a street art project, but I wonder if there was more explanation as to where this started, how it would sell. I do find that some people it speaks to them, and I think when you go through certain things or when you're open to certain things, you gravitate towards it. But because I tend to gravitate towards work like that, it is in some ways not harder to sell, but more like I do find like when I go to markets and stuff, it's the stuff that, you can buy and give to your aunt for Christmas kind of thing, And you always kind of have to have a variety of price ranges for people to buy stuff. And so, and the more obscene it is in a sort of vernacular way, because I also struggle with the word obscene because some people say vulvas are obscene. I think it's like stupid because we all came from one. Like we've all seen one up very closely. And I would argue that the world is very preoccupied with them. But don't look at them, right? Like why is vulva art important? That was one of the questions that you sent to me, and I was like, well, how many, allow me to be crass, but how many dicks have you seen spray painted, carved into desks, like everywhere? We see a penis all the time. When have we seen, and the second you see a vulva, you're offended by it? To me, it's like, well, I think we need to push that further. Like, I think about creating giant vulvas and like, recreating those magic portals in reality in like public spheres. I haven't quite gotten the gall to do it yet, but I mean, who knows? Maybe one day I'll know. But, I find it just so detached from our natural way of existing, our sense of sexuality, our sense of human beings. Like why is something that is so sacred? It's something that creates, like life comes from it. And we see it in nature all the time. Look at Georgia O'Keeffe's work, right? Like you see these images everywhere, yet we have to censor it. Why? And then you can get into like sex education and all those sort of like controversial takes that people have on what you should and shouldn't be teaching children. It's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the right way is, but I also don't think that hiding natural forms is bad either. Yes, obviously there's discernment, there's this understanding of, growing up and understanding your body and all that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that, but like the vulva artwork showcasing on like something that's more public and your children having free access to Pornhub, like what's the difference there? If anything, Pornhub is probably like is explicitly much more problematic, and whereas showcasing the beauty of something like that to me is a testament to how far away we've come from valuing the matriarchy. And when we look at matriarchal societies in the past, like I've really been a little bit obsessed about it more recently because I'm diving very much into my ancestry, and half of my dad's from Crete and my mother's from Cyprus. And Crete, I think both of them were matriarchal societies for a very long time. They were insular societies that lived on islands, and they valued the female, and we look at these societies and their sort of hierarchies and how successful they were. If anything, the obscenity of that to me is just a testament to how devalued we are. It's the power that having that expression of the void, the chaos that nature holds, the void of the inside of your body, the darkness, right? And in some ways, the vulva adorns it. The feminine is about holding space for the chaos. And to me, that's, you look at the witch trials that happened in the past, and how the whole medical profession came out of annihilating natural awareness of the body, right? And these women who were wise and healed populations of people were stifled. And I think the sort of collapse of that is just an expression of why we probably are afraid of it, because the nothingness is terrifying. Nothingness is everything, right? Chaos is everything. It's that void, that natural void. I don't know what another word for it, but
Staring into the black hole.
yeah, there's something unnerving about it. It's, the way that astronauts go into space and come back changed, right? They're just like, you don't realize how insignificant you are. The female body can produce humans, like, and restricting our access to that, I think, is a really, really smart trick.
From the cosmos emerged all life. So from our own internal cosmos emerges life. It is from the black hole, from the darkness, from the next, the beyond, right? The thing that is not knowable, the last frontier of our knowledge. And that is true even to today. I mean, I should not have referred to the clitoris as one of the orifices. It's not an orifice. It's a bundle of nerves. But it only got mapped, fully got mapped within like the last week.
Right? Like, the female anatomy itself is so under researched. We know this, right? Like, we know that like women's health is very under examined, right? And why? I think at this point it's probably because they were taught not to care. But at a certain point, there for sure is an element of fear. Women having the power to create life, the power to heal life, the power to understand nature. We bleed with the moon, right? Like, our connect, and men also have this, if like they tuned into it, but like the inherent connection to nature that the female body has is, you can't refute it. I think stripping us of that knowledge, that awareness, and I think also that's where my interests in mental health are too, because I do believe that in some ways mental health is sort of a pacified way of expressing gifts, right? Like, to a degree, obviously. I mean, I'm not an expert or anything, but I think the things that we fear are often the things that probably hold the most power. So
Yes.
if we're afraid of seeing vulvas, that probably says something.
Yes. Elfie, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
I
It's,
appreciate you too. It was really nice to hear your thoughts on things.
so you will be in our Vulva and Vagina art exhibit this June 5 to 21, 2026. And we're really looking forward to showcasing your work for all of our visitors.
I'm very excited to be part of it. I always keep my pieces and I find the best avenues to share them, and I'm very particular about it. And when I saw your call, I was like, whoa, that's the perfect space. I think I have some perfect work for that.
And so close.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elfie. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you again very soon.